night.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream, such as it is, variously named. Hope everybody's doing well and has had a good weekend so far. Oh, I'm stretchy. It's one of those early morning, gotta wake up the body and the mind kind of things. And what better way to wake up your mind than with 3 tips on how to facilitate conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I came across this one from my new friends at Education Elements, but I don't know that it's specifically related to school, so I didn't put on the curriculum of fear veneer today. But who knows? We'll see what we get. Hope everyone's doing well. Say a few hellos before we get into it. Matt Barnes, hello. Jaeger Pony, Zalbla, St. Michael, Maniac Man 2030, Wikipedia Snippet, Tiaforix, no name, and who else? Nobody Not Me, Pip Bin. All right, well, hope everybody's doing well this morning. So yeah, not much preamble to be had. We're going to get tips on how to have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, if you've watched my channel for any amount of time, that D and I, or DEI, as it has relatively recently been transmogrified into, is one of my favorite subjects. So with that, I will start off with a few seconds for sound test. You guys tell me if you can hear it, and then we'll begin. This comes in at just under 8 minutes, so a nice, relaxing, brief stream today. Hopefully.
So, you want to talk about race in your organization?
Oh, do I? I can't wait to. You're going to tell me how. Oh, boy. Everybody hear that? Everybody hear about being ready to talk about race in your organization? Oh, boy. All right. 5x5 said Sabian 187. Mike Savage, Blarg, and X43902-467. Check your logic. All right. Well, yes, I want to. Please tell me how.
Perhaps you're hosting a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion at large. If you're planning to facilitate dialogue about these kinds of topics and you're wondering how you should approach it, this tea time has your name on it.
Well, there's one way I would approach it, and that's by improving your audio quality. The echo is pretty bad. I was not aware the echo would be this bad. Hopefully you guys can still understand it. I can. It's just a little, out there. But okay, tell me how. Tell me how.
And if you stick around to the end, you'll find out about how you can get some practice engaging in these kinds of conversations and take action.
Oh boy, I love practice. I can't remember if I stuck around. I think I might have cut out the end because it looked like it was just click here to subscribe kind of thing. So if we miss that, I'm sure we'll survive.
Let's get into it.
Okay. Okay, I don't know if this music is copyrighted or anything, so I'm going to skip past the opening montage here. Okay. All right.
Hey, good people. It's me, Jessica Anderson, Equity Strategist and Marketing Project Manager at Education Elements.
Ah, so you do work for Education Elements. Okay. Well, I am ready to be educated. Tell me what to do, Jess.
And this is Tea Time, an explainer series where we tackle topics of racial inequity in 10 minutes or less.
Oh, boy.
Today, we are talking about how to talk about race.
Oh, this is my favorite part. I love learning things. I love learning how to do things. All right, so how does one talk about race? Not why should we, simply how to, because it is I guess, assumed imperative.
Are you having conversations about these kinds of topics? Tell me more about it in the comments.
Oh, I doubt I will, but proceed.
Now, talking about race, racism, and equity, justice, and liberation is difficult. It doesn't have to be, but right now, for most folks, it is. We can talk about what will get us to a place where it doesn't have to be so hard, but I will leave that to another video.
Why is it so hard? Why are folks uncomfortable with it? I'd like to know. I know we won't probably cover that here, but again, I also ask again, why do we need to? Why should we? What is the point? Doesn't it just increase divisiveness ultimately? Isn't it? Or I should say, does it not come across as an accusation 9 times out of 10 than an actual conversation?
This time around, we're going to get into 3 key strategies to facilitate conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I thought we were going to facilitate conversations about race. Seem to have diluted the issue a bit there.
And number 3, it is vital that you establish some norms at the beginning of your conversation. This might seem like an obvious note to some, but I've seen countless conversations be thwarted or even harmful due to a lack of ground rules.
Okay, a lack of ground rules end up making conversations harmful. All right, so what rules should there be in place to talk about race? I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Now, if you look up and the conversation has suddenly been dominated by a few specific people, or generalizations are flying around like frisbees, it may be a sign that there are not enough norms set for how to engage in healthy and productive conversation.
But what if the person talking is relaying their lived experience? Would I be at all justified in interrupting or interjecting, especially if I'm not, I don't know, the right color? Who should or should not be dominating a conversation on race?
So before diving right into the content of the conversation, kick off the dialogue with some ground rules. You can co-create them with people if the size of the conversation and the audience is not too big, but have some norms ready to share.
Like?
Try things like share the mic.
Share the mic. Okay, well, I just wonder, like, how does this work in practice? Like, is that how you introduce this to, and we're talking about an organization. So I'm just going to think back to an organization I belonged to for a time, and that was the company I worked for way back in the day. I'm just imagining sitting at my desk and all of a sudden getting a memo or getting a notice or an email saying, everyone, we're going to go have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or we're going to have a conversation about race, whatever else. And so everybody walks into this room to sit down, knowing ahead of time that we're going to be talking about race, which already puts people on edge because it's generally an unpleasant thing to have to dwell on, because it's also irrelevant in most cases, but setting that aside. So that's where it starts. You're not going to talk about like that part where you're putting everybody essentially on notice that they're going to be talking about race. We just already arrived at this meeting, at this conversation. Okay. All right. You're not going to explain why it's necessary or what utility it serves, just that we're going to do it. Okay. All right. So it's already happened. No preamble, nothing else. All right. So share the mic.
Share space with others here. If you're quick to speak, lean into listening. If you're slow to speak, we invite you to share. Speak from the I. No, not your literal I. Use I statements to speak for yourself and your experiences.
Oh, I. What if I say like something to the effect of, I as a man, or I as a, place myself in demographics. What if I do that? Is that still permissible? Because that happens a lot.
And my favorite one, what's shared here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here.
Is this a support group? Is this like Alcoholics Anonymous? What? I have so many questions. I doubt they'll be answered.
Depending on the circumstances of the conversation, you may want to encourage confidentiality, but you do want people to continue to engage in conversations beyond this one moment.
Confidentiality over what? So you want to talk about race. To what end? What is the utility of this conversation? What is the goal of it? Facilitating a conversation about these subjects for what reason? Are you going to give us at least that much? Like, what is the ultimate outcome or desirable outcome from having this conversation. Just how to have the conversation, just for no reason. But hey, guess what, guys? Today we're going to talk about race. Why? I don't know. Because we got to. Okay.
Name that. You'll also want to think about what are some of the issues that are present in your organization and build norms around them. Is the organization confrontation averse? Build norms that encourage people to name what they are experiencing and give them some tools to help them do so productively.
So have a conversation even if there's no instigating incident, just to do it. Just assuming that there are issues in your company or your organization. Okay.
Encourage people to treat the conversation as a brave space, a space of learning, naming, and engagement.
Learning, naming, and engaging. Is this an interrogation? Is this an inquisition or a conversation?
Does your organization dismiss emotions as the absence of logic? Create norms that welcome emotions into the space, especially since the content is deeply personal. Affirm that emotions do not inherently mean the absence of logic.
Why are we doing this? I know. I should be asking. It's a broken record. Okay.
But also name the importance of centering impact over intent. Now for number 2.
What, centering impact over intent? What does that mean? Centering impact over intent. I'm not learning anything here. You're doing a very poor job in teaching me something. You're saying things, but there's no context, there's no reference, there's no explanation, just things. Why are we having this conversation? Why? What is the ultimate goal here? Just, okay.
Importance of centering impact over intent. Now for number 2, I think I'm going to need to invite a friend of mine to walk us through. Kim, can you help the people out?
Well, Jess, it's important for anyone leading conversations around DEI to recognize their role as facilitators and empower others to share.
Recognize your role as facilitators and empower other people to share. Share what? What if I'm somebody in an organization? And I know it's a completely hypothetical science fiction concept. What if I'm somebody in an organization who doesn't care about race? Like, it is a non-issue. I don't care. I don't care what someone's race is. I don't care about my race. It is an irrelevancy. I just want to do my job or, fulfill my role. What if I'm that person? Right? What if like the entire group, except for the facilitator who takes it upon themselves to introduce this conversation into the equation, what if everybody in the group doesn't give a shit? Pardon my French. What if they don't care? Why do we need to have this quote unquote conversation? And if I have no interest in the subject, can I just excuse myself, or do I have to subject myself to an interrogation over something that is, to me, nonsense and an irrelevancy?
Many of us have seen a classic scenario play out. Your company holds conversations around internal culture, and the same 2 or 3 people have the mic for the majority of the conversation.
Yeah, you already said share the mic. That was sub-tip number 1, so...
It's a buzzkill.
Tell me about it. They talk just a little too long, take up just a little too much space. In those moments, it's on the facilitator to leverage their role to make space for others.
Yes, whether we're talking about this subject or anything else, if you're there to have a group conversation where everyone is encouraged to contribute, yeah, someone facilitating the conversation or the presentation needs to try to, facilitate a conversation. But if someone doesn't want to participate, what are you going to do? Force them to? If only 1 or 2 people care about this subject and everybody else in the room is like, I don't care, then what do you do? What if the people facilitating this are the people with the problem? Just wondering.
You're setting norms at the top of the conversation. Make sure you let others know that you will be leveraging your role as a facilitator to make sure the conversation is as inclusive as possible. So sometimes you might interject to invite others to speak.
Okay, is it just me or is it kind of creepy watching a Pixar avatar talking to me? Why isn't there a person here? I know. I'm a boomer. I just find it a little bizarre.
So when Jim has been getting a little too comfortable at the mic, you've already warned the people that you may jump in to say, Jim, thank you for sharing, but I want to make space for some others to chime in.
Yeah, Jim. Stop talking, Jim. You've had enough time, Jim. It's other people's turn, Jim. Jim. Oh my God. What a jerk.
I would love to hear from Lee, Cheyenne, Oluwatosin, or others who haven't spoken yet.
Leverage your role as a facilitator.
I love the fact, and I know this is very subtle, I love the fact that Jim is represented as a white male, a very, very pale white male, and then everybody else who gets a turn is everything but. Very subtle, guys. Very subtle.
Spoken.
Leverage your role as a facilitator to empower everyone.
How do you empower everyone? What if somebody doesn't care? What if somebody's nervous or whatever else? Like, why are we? Is this a pep talk? Okay.
Pay attention to who is speaking and who is not. Interject in real time as needed and set up the expectation.
I'm still wondering what the purpose is, setting aside expectations. But okay, what are the expectations? What are the expectations in a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What should someone be expected to do? And to what end, again?
Speaking of expectation, I just want to name that sometimes things are shared in these conversations that we don't like or want to hear.
Yeah, Jess, sometimes we just won't receive information we hear if it doesn't resonate with us and what we perceive to be true.
Okay, so what do you do in a situation where you hear something you don't like?
Let's say guests attend a town hall and share that communication has been poor. Your response should not be,
we do communicate, they're wrong.
Instead, allow the information and trends that come up in these conversations to reveal multiple perspectives.
Well, what if those perspectives are absolutely and totally based on nonsense? Like provable, observable nonsense? Or what if it's so anecdotal and abstract that it can't be proven or disproven and just doesn't actually add to the conversation, but just ends up being, I don't know, useless fodder? What do you do then? I mean, when you're trying to have a quote-unquote conversation about an abstraction, right? People's perspectives on race, what do you hope to get out of it? What is the goal? Thank you, Mr. Tickletrunk, for the happy dancing Dogcat Fox. Oh, Dogcat Fox. Thank you, Mr. Tickletrunk.
Perhaps the modes of communication that you've previously used have not reached all intended audiences. Or maybe the cadence is wrong.
And maybe you have been communicating a lot internally, but not as much externally. And that matters too.
What? Like what? What are you talking about? The cadence? The cadence of the internally, externally? If it's an organization, what does that mean internally, externally? I'm not learning anything here, guys. I'm really not.
Your job in these conversations is not to tell people what singular truth exists for you, but rather to uncover and explore the reality of different experiences.
So we're there to have a, stream of consciousness, free-flowing confession session? Everybody gets to say what they think about race? Why? To what end? Why are we having this conversation? In which instances are these conversations helpful? Doing it to do it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But maybe I missed the boat somewhere. Maybe I'm the Jim here. I don't know.
Now, for the top tip. At number 1, we have design with the end in mind.
Okay, all of this was just preamble to the actual purpose. All right. Tell me some ideas about what the end goal is, I hope.
It is crucial that you know your goal before designing your approach to this conversation.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. What do you hope to accomplish out of this? Okay.
Is your goal to get people to move toward a particular action?
I don't know. Is it? Am I trying to turn my employees and or coworkers into activists?
Toward a particular action? Is your goal to gather information? Or is your plan to spark personal reflection?
Spark personal reflection. Gather information. Who here cares about race? I mean, how do you imagine these conversations are going to go in the real world? Right? What do you think is going to happen? The people who don't care about race or find it somewhat jarring to be queried on skin color in the workplace or whatever organization we're talking about are going to shy away from it, right? And as far as I've seen from many speakers, shying away from these conversations is purportedly an indication that you have a problem, right? It's reflective of your fragility or something. And those people who glom on to these conversations with passion and fervor are celebrated as though people who are really excited about talking about race are inherently more virtuous than everyone else. I don't know. I live in a mirror universe right now. Thank you, Redneck Ram, for the Hey You pair. Hey You. Thanks, Redneck Ram.
Each of these are valid goals, but warrant very different designs for conversation.
If you're aiming to gather information, then you need to think about preparing open-ended, non-leading questions that prompt people to share their experiences and the trends they've witnessed.
Share their experiences and trends they've witnessed. Okay, so you're looking to, so if you're in an organization, you want people to tell you if they have witnessed or experienced or felt like there's a problem. And you want them to do this amongst themselves and the other coworkers in a group session. You want them to tell you about their experiences with race in the workplace with everybody else there. Okay, thank you. This is Kyle. Hello, chat people and scribbles. Took me forever to finally send this. I don't know. Is there? I don't know what YouTube does when it comes to these things. Thank you again, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Quote, you're a racist. If you say you're not, that's just you hiding it. Racism's everywhere, unquote. My employer has no right to ask these questions. Yeah, I don't know. Again, maybe I'm living in a fantasy world or something. I don't understand what initiates, quote unquote, these conversations. And I'll tell you what, it is interesting that our speaker started out by very bluntly saying, so you want to talk about race in your organization. It is usually not the case in what I've observed watching videos and presentations like this in the past. It is usually not the case that diversity and inclusion executives or consultants or anything will go straight to actually referencing race. Because oftentimes saying diversity, equity, and inclusion is a softer method of not actually saying we're going to be talking about race by actually not mentioning the word or not getting there eventually. Usually they want to talk about, when they say diversity, they list off things like, different perspectives, different genders, different orientations, different ethnicities, different races. They'll usually put race somewhere near the middle or the end of the list of things that is inclusive in diversity, for lack of a better phrase. So it was interesting that they started off right out of the gate. This is about race. And then mentioning diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though those are completely, various terms, but we're only talking about race. That's what makes this interesting to me. It also makes it more bewildering as to actually why you would talk about these things, or I should say this subject in the workplace, and what the goal would be in doing so. What data is the facilitator hoping to gather from people telling them about their experiences or their perspectives on race? What if my perspective is, this is a waste of time and nothing but divisive? I wonder how that perspective would be entertained in such a setting. Thank you, Gear PG, for the pair offering me mysterious red drink. I'll just pretend it's cocoa. I like cocoa.
Ask one question at a time and avoid double barreling your questions. You want to let people know up front why they are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really do. Yeah, that is really the first and foremost most important question. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? To what end is this conversation? Not interrogation. No. But conversation. Yeah.
Why they are there, what the information will be used for, and whether the information shared will be anonymous.
It's not going to be anonymous. You're sitting amongst your coworkers. You're in a room with everybody looking at one another. There's no anonymity. This isn't like a whole bunch of strangers from different parts of society coming together in a conference room somewhere for Alcoholics Anonymous. And aside from this issue that they all share and they're there to talk about, they have no relation, no connection to one another. It's not anonymous in an organization, in a company, in a group. Everybody is there for a particular reason. If you want to have it anonymous, then you have private conversations with individuals. You don't do it in a group setting. Okay? Unless you're also talking about one-on-one conversations, because it doesn't sound like you're talking about one-on-one conversations when you're talking about passing the mic and so on. There's no anonymity here. What are you talking about?
If your goal is to prompt reflection, then you'll want to focus on discussion questions and exercises that expose blind spots in a person's perspective.
Oh, so the facilitator is going to know what my blind spots are. The blind spots I have in my perspective, according to the facilitator and their perspective. Okay.
Ask questions that zero in on root causes. What's the why?
That has been my question since the jump. What is the why of this?
You'll need exercises or questions that encourage people to interrogate things that may seem so normal, everyday, or inconsequential that they might not think twice about it.
Oh, so interrogating microaggressions. Microaggressions likely categorized by the facilitator. Did you know that this thing you're doing is actually evil? Says me.
You'll need to be comfortable with silences, pregnant pauses, and people working through responses more slowly.
Working through responses. Like me looking at you with a completely lost gaze as I have no idea why I'm here, what we're talking about, or what you expect of me. But also knowing that if we're going to be categorizing things that most people might seem as normal but are actually problematic, wondering if I say the wrong thing here, or more accurately, if I say something that someone here decides to take in the wrong way, is my job at risk?
There has to be room for thoughts that are not fully formed yet. And there has to be room for mistakes to be made by those engaging with you.
If your goal is to spark a change in behavior, then you want to focus on activities and exercises that outline a challenge, share best practices, prompt people to commit to the work,
set intentions, establish a plan of action, and design an accountability measure to support the behavioral change.
Behavior modification based on racial ideology. That's the only thing I can assume is coming out of this. Focus on activities or exercises that outline or analyze a challenge. No idea what that means. Share best practices. No idea what that means. Prompt a commitment to the work. I love the work as a phrase. It sounds so spiritual and so meaningful and abstract and completely mysterious at the same time. To do this work, the hard work of, etc. Set intentions. Set intentions. Okay. Establish a plan of action. Design an accountability measure. To what end? You can't even give us an example of like what the eventual outcome or hopeful result of all of this is supposed to be. Anything?
The end informs the means.
The end informs the means. Yes. Well, what is the end? What is the ultimate goal in behavior modification here? What do you want people to be doing after this?
So, folks, just to recap, set up some norms, leverage your role as a facilitator, and design with the end in mind. This episode's teabag mantra is, you don't need trauma to have a story worth telling.
The teabag mantra? Oh, context. Oh, context. You are both a benefit and a bane.
You'll catch that 2 steps later. If you want to get some practice leading through challenges of equity and inclusion, join me and my fellow colleague, Crystal Hsu, for an ongoing gathering called Equity in Action, a weekly scenario study.
Ooh, a weekly scenario study? Oh, man. You mean I can go somewhere else to learn more about whatever this is?
Where we will use case studies to walk through potential ways to respond to interpersonal and cultural dynamics that require an equitable and inclusive lens.
Case studies? Oh, I picked the wrong video. So you actually go through active examples of this. Except in your summary thing, you're not even going to give us even a high-level example of what's going on? Okay.
Learn more about the group at the link below.
And if you're having trouble just getting diverse voices to engage in these conversations, then you'll want to download our Include Guide, a guide written by the two of us alongside our colleague Crystal Hsu to tackle ways to incorporate those in the margins in your efforts to create more equitable and inclusive spaces.
All right, good people. As always, hit subscribe to...
Yeah, no. Well, I already subscribed to the channel because it's a new source of interesting information. Okay, so gather up people in your organization to sit down with some unknown goal in mind. Either you're going to be gathering information about something, you want to change behaviors, or you just want to talk, I guess, about race, specifically about race. Now, here's the thing. If you removed the general specificity of race or diversity, equity, and inclusion, etc., from this, and you just listed off, here is how you start a conversation or a discussion in your organization. In the most high-level, abstract sense, I suppose some of this advice is not useless. You know, you have to know ahead of time what you're going to be discussing, what you want the outcome to be, and so on and so forth. But this seems to be combining the kind of, I don't know, presentation you'd have in a company regarding a project, or here's what this month's numbers are, or something like that, but also turning it into a support group. Everybody shares the mic, everybody shares their emotions and so on, but this is about an organizational meeting about planning an action or wanting an outcome. I don't know that you can combine those two things together in that setting and make it make any sense whatsoever. Okay? Now, again, it depends on the organization, I suppose. It depends on the circumstances. But if this is a goal-oriented conversation, but you're also talking about having everybody have their say and don't, restrict emotions from the conversation, and it doesn't mean that there's no logic because emotions are there. Well, again, is this a organizational goal-oriented meeting, or is this a support group? And what do you mean anonymity in a group conversation involving your organizational members? It sounds more like an interrogation. It sounds more like an inquisition, especially when there's no specificity as to what we're doing there and why. So this was a mixed bag, as I kind of presumed it would be. But apparently, in order to get the fullness of what we're talking about, I have to go watch some other videos, which I'm guessing are probably hours long at the least. All right, well, there's that. I'll take a few minutes for anybody who'd like to comment or question or make observations of their own, because I don't want to dominate the conversation. I don't want to marginalize anyone else who might want to take the mic for a moment. So, Prony Maloney, mixed bag of nuts. That's what I would say. Lexi Mads, pull up the example video. Pull up. Okay, that would assume that I've already found that video, whatever they're talking about, and that I have it ready for prime time, and that I've been able to look at the audio and tweak it up a bit, which I haven't. I will look at their page real quick to see if I can see something that sounds like that. Let's see. When was this? Okay. Oh, well, okay. Just as an aside, I just spotted this lady has, obviously this is a series, and one of hers, which is a couple weeks old now, 5 myths about restorative justice in schools. I haven't done anything on restorative justice in a while, but okay. Facilitate conversations. How can school leaders improve diversity, equity, and inclusion practices? That's an hour-long live stream webinar. Yeah, it looks like anything that would actually involve examples are long drinks of water. So, Mike R., can we get another vid, please? Another one of these? I mean, I guess I could. It'd be a little rough. You'd have to give me a second here, because I'd have to, I mean, I wouldn't have a whole lot of time to process this. But okay. Why not? It's Sunday. I don't have a whole lot to do today. So I will attempt in the next couple of minutes to get the restorative justice thing queued up. You'll have to bear with me for a few minutes. For those of you listening in the future, I will attempt to put in a timestamp in the description to jump to that next part. Granted, I can make this happen in a reasonable amount of time, so you don't have to listen to me ramble and fill in space for the next few minutes. Let's see, but I'll take other questions and comments in the meantime. Zalbla, you can take all the time you need, Scribe. Well, it's true. I can, if I choose to. I meant. Let's see. No name. I've done these meetings. You either agree with them, remain silent, or if you speak out, they tell you to confront your biases. And that's the thing. Is silence not an acceptable response and participation to these things? If you have nothing to say, is that held against you? I assume it has to be. Everything that I've heard from people, you know, either fragility or your discomfort shows that you have a bias, or why are you uncomfortable talking about this? Shouldn't you be comfortable talking about this? And on and on and on. I've never quite understood that logic. It sounds like McCarthyism kind of logic. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I've never had to be a part of one of these kinds of conversations or meetings in a company. I think the closest I came, because I was working for a company long before all this stuff became so prevalent. And the only time we ever had a meeting that was like this was, it was one of those sort of like mandatory meetings where you talk about the dangers of harassment in the workplace, you know, or danger signs. People like having their hands linger too long on somebody and that kind of stuff. Sort of basic workplace red flags of there's a problem, or if you're uncomfortable about what somebody's doing. Not inconsequential stuff, and not stuff that was completely irrelevant because I saw that stuff happen. It happened to me. Sometimes people don't know where their boundaries should be or don't care about what other people's boundaries are. So, all right. Well, off the cuff and without any preparation, I guess we can start the social justice in school. Social justice, restorative justice in schools. Let me get that queued up here. No, not that. I want that. Yeah, guys. So and given that I'm starting this sort of off the bat without any preamble, I can't promise that the sound quality or anything else is going to be all that great. But I will do my best. Okay. Let's see. Anything else people want to say? No name. I work in education at an elementary school. These are weekly meetings. They call them inclusivity meetings. Aha. You have my sympathy. Wikipedia snippet. I had an imaginary friend named Fred Pterodactyl as a kid. I promise Wikipedia, everything you say here stays here. Lexi Mad Scribely, did you ever see the episode of NCIS where they did the sexual harassment training and took the piss at the entire episode? Red light, yellow light, green light. I've never watched an episode of NCIS, so I have no idea. All right. Well then, off the cuff and without any planning, let's talk about 5 myths about restorative justice in schools. Now, just as my own baseline predicate, restorative justice, for those of you that don't know, restorative justice, basically, to whittle it down in a very, very, very sort of literally grade school way, shake hands and part as friends, right? Let's talk this out, that kind of thing. That notion about conflict resolution is at the heart of restorative justice practices. Now, I've done many videos on restorative justice as a supplement, or in the most extreme cases, a replacement for the actual criminal justice system. And there are a lot of problems with that idea, as I've covered many times before. However, in the realm of a school setting, I cannot say that a restorative philosophy is necessarily a wrong idea or a bad notion. Because when you're talking about children, when you're talking about students who are still developing their social skills, my brain goes off course, developing their conflict resolution and how they handle their emotions and handle situations, and they're still children, right? They're still learning. Having a system in place or having policies in place that encourage a dialogue and establishing empathy or sympathy amongst students and children one to another when these things arise, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Okay, it's after they've become adults, it's after we start getting into serious crimes where restorative justice practices become a big question mark. So, that being said ahead of time, let's learn about 5 myths regarding restorative justice in schools. Maybe I'll actually learn something on this one.
Are you examining disciplinary policies?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on the context. Do tell.
Looking to develop a path towards accountability for racial incidents in your community?
Whoa. Racial incidents in my community. Restorative justice in schools is like, or can be like, 2 kids are fighting. Why are they fighting? Let's talk it out and part as friends. We're immediately going to racial incidents. I see a theme here.
Or you've recently discovered the term restorative justice and you're curious if you know exactly what it means or if it's right for you.
Is your iteration of restorative justice specifically about racial issues? Because that's very niche for the philosophy of restorative justice. Or maybe this is the new definition.
Well, you're in the right place. And if you want to get some practice responding to racial incidents or matters of equity and inclusion in your school or district, join my colleague Crystal and I for our next live tea time. Check out the link in the description to sign up.
Okay, we're back to the opening again, so I'm going to skip this. Okay, yeah, restorative justice, as far as I have understood it, does not inherently require or involve racial issues. It is about conflict resolution. It is about bringing balance back to a situation of conflict in a way that is not, let's say, punitive. So, okay, I'm ready to learn about the myths of restorative justice.
Hey there, good people. It's me, Jessica Anderson, Equity Strategist and Marketing Project Manager from Education Elements. This is Tea Time, an explainer series all about racial equity for learning organizations.
Oh, okay. That's my disconnect. Maybe she said it in the last one as well and I missed it. This whole series is about race. It's not about tips for educators or things in a general sense. It's just about race. You know, I hate to say it, but I can't think of it right now. There's a word for people who dwell inordinately on race. It's escaping me.
And for this episode, we are talking about 5 common myths about restorative justice. And if you want more resources around racial equity and various forms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your community, be sure to check out our website for more.
Yeah, this entire website, this entire organization, apparently, with such an innocuous name as Education Elements, has a very focused goal, apparently. Interesting.
So, what exactly is restorative justice?
Do tell.
Well, let's take a step back and think about our approaches to discipline and justice in different ways. So, a punitive approach, or punitive justice, focuses on laws rather than harm, and responds to laws being broken with suffering, isolation, and removal from the community.
That's one way to put it. Yes, punitive or being punished for your misdeeds. Yeah, okay. Depending on the circumstances, it may be necessary. Are we not going to be talking about specific crimes again? I know she's going to be, well, from her previous statements, I'm assuming she's going to be talking about school-based, child-based disciplinary actions for the activities of children. Relatively minor, fights or arguments or little things like that, not serious crimes. Isolation from the rest of the community may be necessary depending on the circumstances. But okay, yes, punitive justice does involve these things. And it's not about making people happy. It's about, securing people from danger, usually, or trying to correct someone who's done something terrible, yes.
In the classroom, we can see some clear examples of this when students are physically removed from the class, right? We may send them to the principal's office, serve them detentions, school suspensions, or expulsion.
Yeah, those are the classic punitive measures taken by schools, depending on the circumstances. Again, depending on the circumstances.
The focus is less on addressing the harm and more on communicating severity or detriment. And our response is often to take away resources and care in response to harm.
Okay, I'm going to try to hold back here a little bit. Response to harm. You need to give me an active example. Okay? You need to give me an active example here. Somewhere in here, you need to give me an active example. Because someone who, let's say there's a kid in class who won't be quiet, right? Disrupting the class. Okay. No one's been harmed, right? And we're not talking about like physical harm or anything else, unless you want to talk about the abstract of this kid constantly disrupting the class is harming the other students' abilities to learn. That might be one way to put it. But in the moment, if the teacher still has to conduct the class and this kid will not stop talking or whatever else, the simplest solution is just remove the kid from the classroom, report the behavior, and then try corrective measures away from the other students so that it doesn't continue to disrupt the class. You know? And especially if the kid's acting out is, I don't know, a result of something else, something that maybe shouldn't be discussed or interrogated about in the middle of the classroom, it might be better to separate them and find out what's going on. You never know what's going on until you ask, and you probably shouldn't do it in front of the other students. And I know I'm going off a little bit here, but I have seen and or been involved in such incidents in the past in my own schooling. So,
rather than working together to understand and address why that harm happened in the first place. Well, that's precisely where restorative justice comes in. Restorative justice is an alternative approach that is defined by Howard Zare of the Zare Institute for Restorative Justice as a process that involves, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense to then collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible.
Okay. And again, depending on the circumstances, this might be all well and good, right? And especially in school, when you're dealing with kids who are still learning how to interact with one another, how to deal with problems, and so on, that may make some kind of sense. Okay. Restorative justice as a concept, generally speaking, is not inherently a bad one, but it is entirely context dependent. It is entirely requiring the specificity of the circumstances as to whether or not it makes any sense. Okay.
It's a practice that formed in the 1970s to respond to some of the challenges of the Western legal system.
No. Coming to terms and coming to a peaceful agreement between people that doesn't involve punishment per se was not developed in the 1970s. Maybe the term was created in the 1970s. Maybe it was codified as some sort of theory in the 1970s. But the notion of shaking hands and parting as friends is not the 1970s concept. It's been around since the beginning of time.
But it's critical to name that several aspects of the foundational practices of restorative justice, including talking circles, have been adopted from indigenous peacemaking practices from around the world.
Indigenous peacemaking practices. It's not just the logical end result of certain conflicts among people in general. Okay. It's not just pragmatism in a lot of instances. Okay.
Now, where restorative justice focuses on the specific incident and the particular stakeholders involved, transformative justice goes a step further to examine the systems and the culture that allowed for or encouraged such incidents to occur.
Okay, so now we're going to drift off into transformative justice. Analyzes the systems which allowed the incident to occur. All right, so two kids in school have a fight. All right, kid number one called kid number two a mean name. All right, and it wasn't a racial name, although I bet you'd love it if it was. It was just, you're a doo-doo head, right? Okay. How much time and effort and psychology are you going to put into that conflict? Right? Are you going to apply restorative justice? Have the two of them shake and part? Just get it over with, move on? Or are you then going to try to psychoanalyze each kid into why this happened and what the damage is and yada, yada, yada? Really? Because again, if you don't give me an active example, I'm thinking about school-level conflicts. Conflicts between children who do not have any notion of any of these higher-minded ideas or forces at work or anything else. They're just kids. Is this really kid-level stuff you're talking about here?
Transformative justice seeks to investigate the systems and culture, and to also bring learning, healing, and transformation to the larger community.
So, a conflict in a school. I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that we're talking primarily elementary schools, okay? Because most of the times when I'm seeing these teachers, they're talking about being in 4th or 5th grade or that kind of thing. Elementary school conflict, you're going to impart, or I should say employ, transformative justice to analyze the systems that led to the conflict in order to change the community around you. In a schoolyard fight, okay,
where harm takes place. Miriam Kaba, the founder and director of Project NIA, once said,
because of its focus on the individual, the intervention is on individuals, not the system. And what transformative justice, people, advocates, and people who have kind of begun to be practitioners in that have said is, we have to also transform the conditions that make this thing possible.
The conditions that make this thing possible. A kid calling another kid a duty head. How would you use transformative justice in that instance? Right? Or let's say, just for the sake of argument, a child hits another child. Right? Kid A punches kid B in the shoulder. There's no instigating cause. There's no preamble or red flag fight or anything. Kid just does something impulsive because kids are impulsive. What do you do then? If it's nothing, if it's just kids being kids because they're children, what are you going to do to transform the culture? Harm has been done. There's been a conflict. How do you restore justice in this situation? What does any of this have to do with dealing with children in school?
One of the biggest myths that come with restorative justice is that people view it as simply an alternative to suspension.
I don't know what it is. You haven't given us any examples of how you would employ it or under what circumstances it makes sense. And are there not instances where suspension or removal of a student from the situation is not justified?
It is much more than that. It is a mindset and a cultural shift. A study was conducted at Rutgers where researchers surveyed 412 students across
412? Wow, there's a sample study.
Across 29 classrooms where teachers had received restorative justice training specifically. And what they found was that the more teachers immersed themselves in restorative practices, the better students rated their experiences with those teachers.
Wow, yeah, if those teachers are willing to not punish kids for their bad behavior, I bet they would rate those teachers higher. I bet you. And I also bet you, I'd be shocked if it weren't so, that classrooms and schools that employ restorative justice practices, first and foremost, I would imagine they have had a precipitous drop in disciplinary actions, suspensions, expulsions, principal's office visits, and so on. I would bet you. And I'm sure that is an indication of success.
Those same strong relationships sparked a greater sense of respect between the teachers and students and ultimately led to fewer disciplinary referrals.
So, do you mean to tell me that a philosophy that shies away from employing disciplinary action has a reduction in disciplinary referrals? I am shocked, I tell you.
A second myth about restorative justice is that it boils down to a checklist of actions that we need to implement. Steps that we do. Reflection, check.
Reflection. You mentioned that in the previous video. Reflection, like just thinking about things. Okay.
Talking circle.
Talking circle. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about, no pun intended, circles in restorative justice presentations. Everybody gets into a circle and talks things out. Even if the conflict apparently is between two individuals, you have to bring everybody involved into the situation, or even if they're not involved in the situation, to talk it out. That's how you institute transformative justice, by having everyone confront everybody else's problems, I guess.
Check. This checklist is gonna be a no for me. Kathy Evans, an associate professor of education and the co-author of The Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education, talks about how restorative justice can't just be a set of things we do. It has to be a framework for how we view teaching and learning.
Restorative justice as a framework for how we view teaching and learning. So a process of conflict resolution has to be entwined with how we view teaching and learning. Do tell.
This practice is rooted in the principle that every member of the community should be treated with dignity and respect.
I agree with you there.
Everyone should have a voice.
Yes.
For example, the circle process ensures that every stakeholder involved in an incident is heard.
Every stakeholder involved in an incident. Okay, and I don't know, because I am not being told, just give me a hypothetical. Like, if I was looking at this picture of this group of students sitting around in a circle and comforting each other and everything, what incident was it that involved all of these kids? Right? Where does this make sense? What is going on here? I mean, if you can't be specific for the sake of someone's privacy or something, which doesn't make any sense since you're showing everybody's faces, but either way, give me an example. Give me an incident that requires the entire class or the entire school to sit down and have a talk about something.
Multiple perspectives are considered. And in that same Rutgers study, they found that students began to take the school's rules more seriously as they felt more invested in their relationships with the school and the community.
But if the rules are not being enforced through disciplinary action, then what does it mean to take the rules more seriously? I mean, if you've thrown the rule book out in favor of a restorative justice philosophy of diversionary tactics first and so on, what matters it that there's a rule book?
But there are other studies that support that. Jason Okonafor, a psychology professor, led a 2016 study that found that interventions to encourage empathy and empathetic discipline cut suspension rates in half.
Okay, and again, like I've said before, taking this kind of a philosophical approach in schools with students who are still developing their skills in interacting with one another, depending on the circumstances, can be beneficial and be a better alternative than out-and-out discipline. I want to clarify and affirm that I believe that to be the case. Okay, not every incident requires a strict no exceptions kind of policy, right? I've been countlessly in the past just really against those, whatever they call them in schools. It's not mandatory minimums, but like zero tolerance policies. That's what I was looking for. The zero tolerance policies in school were like, someone does this and this is the immediate result. They are suspended, whatever. A kid picks up, what was it, a chicken nugget? This was the classic example. A kid in the school picked up a chicken nugget that was kind of long and pointed it at another student and said, bang, bang. And that kid was suspended from school, I think it was, or maybe even expelled, because the zero tolerance policy said that anything that even indicated gun violence was out the door, right? Okay, yeah, not for that kind of stuff. For having alternatives to punitive action in schools with kids who are still learning, yes. Adolescents, yes. Makes sense. Okay. But I still don't understand why you come to the conclusion that a reduction in disciplinary referrals when you're instituting a system that doesn't believe in discipline indicates that things are getting better.
And cause shifts in students' perspectives, including an increase in feelings of respect, as well as motivations to behave better.
Yes, shaking hands and parting as friends. A tale as old as time. Not arguing against it. but it's also not a revelation. If it is something that you're trying to institute or at least offer in opposition to zero tolerance policies, hey, you got me. You're pushing in an open door. But it is not the end all be all.
But all that said, it is important that I name that suspensions and disciplinary action are not equally distributed across students of all backgrounds.
Right. I forgot. This is all a series about race.
There is an abundance of research that exposes the disproportionate rates that Black and brown students are suspended relative to white students. Researchers at Stanford found that Black students are
Stanford? Oh, no.
given more extreme punishment for the exact same infractions produced by white students.
Were they the exact same? Were the circumstances exactly the same every time? Was it?
So, while we are talking about the need for alternative approaches to discipline in schools, we have to also ask ourselves, who exactly is being disciplined?
Yes, and here's where we're getting to the racial interrogation. Okay, so I wonder if she's going to offer advice on how to purge ourselves of what is the obvious problem.
A study published in the National Association of School Psychologists.
The National Association of School Psychologists. Okay, for those of you listening at home, she's put up a card that has an abstract from a study, I'm assuming, an examination of restorative interventions and racial equity in out-of-school suspensions. Okay. Districts have been engaged in efforts to reduce, quote, differential processing, unquote, of discipline-referred students based on their racial backgrounds. They strive for fair assignment of exclusionary consequences across racial groups. The current study examines discipline records for one academic year in an urban school district with 9,039 discipline-referred students to identify the factors associated with equitable assignment of out-of-school suspension. Multi-level logistic regression found that student participation in restorative interventions substantially reduced the odds that individual students received OSS. Yeah, again, if you institute a system that does not believe in disciplinary action, you might see a reduction in disciplinary action, because who is administering the discipline? The people administering the disciplinary system. However, such participation was only marginally associated with more comparable assignment of OSS to Black students relative to their white peers. Together, these findings suggest that alternatives to suspension, such as restorative interventions, may yield benefits for all student groups, but they may result in only marginal narrowing of the disparities in suspension rates between Black and white students. This indicates that greater attention is needed to address the inequitable school contexts in which disparities arise. So even after instituting restorative justice practices, you still had a disproportionate disciplinary situation between Black and white students. Okay, if you say so.
Looked at suspension data from a Colorado school district, and what they found was that while restorative justice practices reduced suspensions, Black students still received disproportionately more suspensions than their peers.
Okay, so then in employing transformative justice practices, you would then want to look at the systems that led to those outcomes, right? Okay. How deeply would you be willing to look into the systems that led to those outcomes? How deeply would you be willing to look at the individual instances of discipline that led to those outcomes? I'm just very curious to know. Thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. I don't want to live on this planet anymore. Well, once Moonbase gets built, man, once Moonbase gets built, we'll all have an option.
I'm actively considering pouring out this tea altogether. Excuse me while I try to make it make sense.
What?
I say all this to say, debunked myth number 3 is restorative justice is not your one-stop solution to addressing racism in schools, racial disparities in school discipline, or inequitable school culture.
Whoa. So it is a myth that restorative justice is not the panacea for all racial issues in a school. So restorative justice is the panacea for all racial instances, racial disparities, whatever, in a school. What?
Well, the fourth common myth.
Whoa, wait, what? That was it? That was it. So everything involving race in a school can be solved with restorative justice practices. Everything. And then we're moving on. So you spend some time talking about transformative justice that requires you to examine the systems that may have led to these outcomes. And then you whittle it down to some kids get more discipline than other kids, and we see this disparity on a racial level. Okay, but that's where your inquiry stops? You've come to the conclusion. There's nothing to ask beyond that. And so restorative justice is the answer to all things. Okay.
An equitable school culture. Well, the fourth common myth held about restorative justice is that it is a strategy best implemented when community members can choose to opt in.
Oh, so restorative justice needs to be mandated. No one has an option. Okay.
Everyone gets to decide whether or not they would like to use it to address issues in the classroom. So Ms. Jenkins uses it in her classroom, but Ms. Lieberman doesn't. And we like it that way. Well, remember that study I shared earlier conducted at
Ms. Jenkins and Ms. Lieberman. I could read into that if I really wanted to, I suppose.
And Gregory, the lead researcher, shared that part of what the student study revealed was that people at every level of the school community need to be on board and fully immersed in both the practice and philosophy of restorative justice.
Yes, it needs to be the only option. You have no choice. Okay, so again, if you institute restorative justice practices, mandate them in a school, yeah, you will see a reduction in disciplinary referrals because they will not be allowed.
If you partially commit, you'll get partial results. You'll communicate that the status quo for discipline is indeed still the prioritized model for addressing behavior.
What is the goal? Is disciplinary punitive action inherently bad? Because that's what it sounds like we're being argued here, okay? Is that the problem is the discipline being undertaken. The problem isn't the student and the outcome isn't changing behavior, but simply the act of disciplining a student is wrong. Okay.
The fifth myth, I'll give in just a second.
Well, I'm still trying to process the fourth myth. Because if you don't give teachers or administrators any other option but to do the handshake and make up philosophy, is that the best way to go about it? And what happens when you get to that? This takes me all the way back to every other restorative justice speech I've ever heard regarding the criminal justice system. What do you do about a kid who is violent in the school? Right? Just a kid who is violent, a kid who is harming other students literally. Do you just talk that out? Or do you have to separate that student from the other students for people's safety? Right? What do you do about the cheater in the school? Do you not punish that kid? What conversation do you need to have with the rest of the class about that kid's cheating? If you remove the option or you remove the reflex on any teacher's part to do what is necessary for the most extreme situations, are you really solving the problem, or are you just keeping your numbers low?
But let me say this. If you want to get some practice working through real life scenarios that require an equitable and inclusive lens, join me and my colleague Crystal Hsu for weekly tea time conversations.
Yeah, I know. You have these conversations off to the side somewhere where there is where you give the examples. There is where you tell us how this could actually work in the real world. But those are like hour-long webinars and okay.
Where we practice different ways to respond to situations. You can use the link in the caption to sign up. Now, the fifth and final myth is that these results I just spoke of will come right away. I can already see it. Mr. Radcliffe crafts an email along the lines of, "Dear Jessica, we started applying restorative justice practices in our school this month, but I am concerned as we are not seeing any significant changes in behavior with our students."
Yeah, the problems still persist. In any other instance, I'd be, doling out some discipline or something, but kids don't seem to be getting along with the program. It doesn't seem to be working. Okay, well, how do you respond to that one?
Well, here's the thing. Remember how I said this is a cultural shift? A mindset shift, and not simply a list of action items to complete. Cultural shifts take time. By virtue of what you are doing, you are assisting yourself and your students in unlearning what discipline, community, and accountability looks like.
Really? Yeah, I suppose if I redefine the notion of accountability and I just sort of like wave away any consequences to bad behavior in my classroom, yeah, I guess I would need to have a culture shift in that regard. So how long should a teacher wait? How much time should a teacher waste in waiting for the kids to get with the program of this new philosophy before I take other action? I mean, do the needs of the classroom, does the quality of the education of the students who are not acting out, does that matter? Or should I be affording more and more time to just putting up with bad behavior in my classroom without any corrective action? Is there no place for discipline? And not discipline like, this word discipline, the idea of like, it immediately means something like negative action or something. But having discipline, having boundaries, having corrective measures, holding someone to account for their behavior and on and on and on. These are bad things in and of themselves. We have to redefine them. Okay.
They've been taught a particular set of values all of their lives, which also may vary depending on their background.
A different set of values depending on their background. Why are you so cagey in saying race in some instances, but not in others? Why do you replace race with background in so many instances? Why couch your language? We already know the secret at this point.
That doesn't suddenly go away in a few weeks. Give the process time. Continue to invest in the change.
How much time over the course of the school year and the class day should I give over to this process in which I don't see any results or the behavior's not changing and I still have a class to teach? I mean, how much patience should I have for a process that doesn't seem to be doing anything but perpetuating the problem?
In the end, we need to move towards the kind of justice that not only transforms us as people, but also transforms the culture. So no matter where you are in your journey today, ask yourself, what kinds of community infrastructure can we create to support more safety, transparency, sustainability, care, and connection?
I don't know, a constant free-for-all where everybody talks about their feelings in circles for every problem that arises and we don't actually do any, education in the process. Maybe relying on the parents to teach their kids how to behave. Maybe not taking on a philosophy that we as educators are somehow now the parents of the children and need to craft their philosophy and their behavior and their manners all by our lonesome because we are actually the caregivers of these children. We're going to continually expand our definition of what an educator is beyond the scope of what an educator is. and constantly siphon off the importance of parental care from the equation. Okay.
What are the skills we need to be able to prevent, respond to, heal from, and take accountability for harmful behaviors?
There is a line between where the school should act in doling out discipline and what is left to the parents. You are blurring that line with each one of these initiatives. You're taking on the role of a mentor, or more like, I don't know. And I know this is hyperbolic, but if you've seen some of the educators, as I've seen them in a lot of these presentations, TEDx's, National Association of Independent Schools, and so on, and in some very explicit instances, in the last couple of videos I've done, a lot of teachers are starting to sound a lot like gurus. They're starting to sound a lot like cult leaders as they see their role in the classroom or amongst students, that they are the center of morality and values. And you notice, again, and I'll bring this up every time I don't hear it, throughout this entire video, have we heard once any mention of parents? Have we once heard any mention of engaging with the household? We haven't, have we?
What do those harmed and students who have caused harm need? What are some of the conditions, behaviors, and practices in our community that help set the stage for students' behavior, and how can we change this?
I don't know. Is it the role of the educator to, quote unquote, change the community? Or is your charge to educate the children? Teach them how to think, not what to think. And some things are left to the parents because they are not your children. They are your students. Do you know where the line rests between those two roles?
If you're shifting to restorative or transformative justice practices in your school, let us know about it in the comments. What's working for you? Folks, do me a favor.
Well, yeah, what's working for you, but just don't tell us it's not working. Don't you tell us it's not working. You're just not giving it enough time. You're just not believing enough in it if it's not working. Okay, well, there you go. Those are the quote-unquote myths about restorative justice. And again, there is a place for such a philosophy when you're dealing with adolescents. But it is circumstantial. It depends on the specifics. And it should not be the one-all, be-all of a solution. Because that's not how the world works. That's not how people work. And restorative justice, as your only option, shouldn't start looking like parental guidance. Anyway, a few more questions and or comments from you guys in the chat, and then I will wrap this up for this surprise double feature as requested. And here I am to provide. Mike R., thank you so much. Thank you, Scribe. This is what my day needed. All right. Well, thank you so much for your generosity. My day, I guess, didn't need more bewildering and sort of depressing, sort of authoritarian, weird philosophies. But hey, that's what I sort of marinate myself in day in and day out. Lexi Mad, so I still have no idea what restorative justice is, Scribe Light. What is it? Again, imagine a situation where you have a conflict with another kid. Remember a time when you were a kid and you had a fight with another kid, and the parent comes up or an adult comes up and separates you and says, hey, now apologize, shake hands, and part. That kind of thing. Get over it. Like, what's the problem? Well, he called me a mean name. You turn to the other kid and you say, did you call her a mean name? Yeah. Okay, that's not nice. Apologize. I'm sorry. Do you accept that apology? Yeah. Okay, now go play. That is restorative justice. At its very, very core, that is restorative justice. Hashing out what happened, finding a resolution, and parting. Nothing punitive, nothing terrible, just getting over it, finding a way past it and moving on. That's restorative justice. That's what it really is. And of course, it gets more complicated and there's more nuance as you get older and the situations are more complicated and so on. Sure, but that's the core. That's all it is. But what our speaker's talking about here sounds far, 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 far beyond the scope of that notion. When you start talking about, I'm going to change the culture. Someone did something wrong, therefore there's a problem with the culture. I must change the culture. Thank you, Redneck Ram. Oh yeah, extra scribe today. These are great listening while at work. Gets lonely sometimes delivering packages and mail on weekdays. Well, I am glad to keep you company in whatever capacity that I can. Thank you, Redneck Ram. Nobody Not Me. Scribe it. Thanks for the morning double feature. You are most welcome. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Enjoined it? Enjoined it. If you enjoined it, that's a whole different process. Asia Research Directorate, spare the rod, spoil the child, figuratively. Yes, that's, yeah, putting it more simply, but yeah, finding a solution other than the immediate punitive one. Like I say, not inherently a bad idea if it makes sense, but it is not a panacea. And what our speakers are, both before and now, are proposing are notions of, again, putting a teacher into a role that they do not belong in, expanding what it means to be a teacher to being a guru. And that is a dangerous notion. If you listen to any presentations outside of this, obviously, from teachers and so on, keep something in mind, just as a thought experiment. As they talk about their classrooms, as they talk about their philosophy on teaching, whatever, just keep an ear open for how many times they bring up the role of the parents in whatever they're talking about. Again, not every teacher behaves like this. Not every teacher sees themselves as the end-all be-all guru of the students in their classroom. They understand that they are simply a part of a student's growing up and not the all of a student's growing up. That it's a symbiotic relationship between the teacher, the student, and the parents. Because the student is not spending their entire lives under the teacher's tutelage. They have a life outside of school, and that involves their family and their parents. So if you have a teacher, an educator, an administrator, going on and on about how they want to improve students' lives and so on, and they never bring up the involvement of parents, ask some questions. Really ask some questions, because it is a very dangerous and creepy notion. The more and more I don't hear about it, if you get my meaning. Matt Barnes, my son's class used restorative justice in preschool and kindergarten. It stopped by first grade. It is a way to deal with small children, not teens. Again, yes, in elementary school, it makes the most sense. You know, as an alternative to immediate disciplinary action, depending on the circumstances, with small children, it makes perfect sense. Because again, small children, adolescents, they are learning how to deal with their emotions, their interactivity, their socialization skills, and sometimes these things need gentle corrective measures because they are learning. Not only are they learning in the quote-unquote academics, but they're learning how to be people amongst other people. Because kids that age, they don't spend time with other kids that much, you know? Not in a social setting like that. So yes, in that area of education, restorative justice makes a lot of sense. But as kids get older, as the responsibility falls further and further on them as individuals, because purportedly they've learned more, and also because the teachers are not the parents, Restorative justice takes a lesser and lesser role as an option because you're starting to train kids to become adults, to take responsibility, that their actions have serious consequences depending on what we're talking about. That's what we expect of each other as citizens walking around on the street. You know, if I decide to cut somebody off in traffic, I'm not just going to get a stern warning. There's going to be a consequence. I'm going to get a ticket, right? We're all expected to stay within our lanes associating with one another. Now, again, all depends on the circumstances, and I am not saying that it has no place at all, either in schools or in general society. And I've talked about this on other streams, so I'm not going to go over it now. But if you want to look up, go to my channel and click on the little magnifying glass and just look up the word restorative. And I'm sure you'll find plenty of other examples of criminal justice presentations regarding it and my thoughts on that. So I don't want to go off too much and reiterate. But anyway, everyone, thank you so much for joining me for the surprise double feature. I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate all of you guys coming and hanging out with me and encouraging me along these lines, because I don't know that I'd have the strength to get through some of these things without you guys there with me. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much, moderators, for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you guys have very little to do. Everyone who donated, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. If you'd like to hear more from me or Satsu 2 Cents, you can find the both of us tomorrow night, Monday night, on Satsu 2 Cents' channel at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for The Lords of the Night, where we will talk about the news of the day, news stories you submit, what we've been up to on the internet, and then your questions and comments. Everyone, have a good rest of your Sunday. I hope you are all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.